Okay, well, let's get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to hear a bit more about our research, international talent and local impact, how international graduates power the economy of Greater Philadelphia. Before we get started, I'd like to just take a moment to acknowledge that as we're gathered here today to explore the implications and impact of international college educated talent on our region and economy, we also know that immigration policy is rapidly changing at the national level with the new administration. Make no mistake, our region and our country would not have experienced the level of innovation and growth that it has without the contributions of immigrants. Through this research, we'll focus mainly on the international student segment and showcase quantifiably that we need this important segment of the population to continue to experience economic growth in Greater Philadelphia. So Bill, next slide, please. I'm Jennifer Johnson-Kebea, president of Campus Philly, and I'm joined by my colleague, Bill Keys, program director of International House Philadelphia. We are very pleased to work together to bring this research together for this audience, and we're really happy to share it today. We'll go to the next slide. We also want to thank our sponsors of both the research and bringing this research to fruition. So we are supported by the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Philadelphia, the Department of Commerce in the City of Philadelphia, and the Philadelphia International Airport. Our research partner was eConsult Solutions. Thank you for all of your support to each of these organizations in bringing this project to life. So a little bit about Campus Philly. Those of you on the call who know me and have been around for a while know that Campus Philly celebrated our 20th anniversary this year. We are an economic development nonprofit that focuses on inclusive economic growth by empowering diverse college students and recent grads to explore, live, and work in Greater Philadelphia. We want young people to find their fit here after they graduate and choose to call Greater Philadelphia home. We have a host of programs that are aimed to attract talent to the region, to engage talent when they're here, and to keep them here after they graduate so that they can live and work in the region. Please follow us along on Instagram, across all the social media platforms for sure, and know that our audience is growing and it's dynamic. We have 50,000 plus college students that follow along with us on a weekly basis to hear about the great things to do in and around Greater Philadelphia. We know that 12% of that population are international students, and we have over 50 higher ed and employer partners across the region that support our work and invest in our mission. Thanks, Bill.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. Thanks, Jen, for teeing up the call. I'm Bill Keys, Program Director at International House Philadelphia. And for those of you who have not heard my spiel before, we are a nonprofit that is dedicated to the success of international students and scholars across Greater Philadelphia. Our work takes place in a number of ways. So we have regular events and activities for students and scholars. We also partner with schools and offer trainings for schools on best practices for international student support. And we're increasingly focused on building a pipeline for international graduates of our region's institutions into the Greater Philadelphia workforce. The work we'll go through today, this amazing partnership with Campus Philly, will expound on this a little bit and give us some foundation for why we're doing this. But I'll share a couple of initiatives underway this year, include a series of industry-specific career fairs for international graduates. We're starting with a life sciences fair in April, so stay tuned for that, higher ed folks. All right, Jen, back to you.
Sure. So let's set the stage a little bit. International House Philadelphia and Campus Philly have been working together for over a year to bring this research to fruition. We are organizations that have a long history together. In fact, when Campus Philly was founded 20 years ago and I was an intern with the organization, our first offices, one of our first offices was in the International House in Philadelphia. So long history of working together, and we certainly share similar audiences. I mentioned earlier, 12+% of our population in total that we're working with are international. That's certainly the core focus of Bill's work at International House. And so coming together, we certainly realized that we had a lot to explore here in terms of this important segment of the student body in Greater Philadelphia, but also the workforce. So Bill, let's go to this next slide as I paint a picture of really what we're working with. Now, Campus Philly has for a long time looked at retention data in Greater Philadelphia. We want to understand how many college graduates are retaining in the region and what that growth looks like. When we were founded 20 years ago, the Greater Philadelphia region was only retaining about 25% of its college educated talent. That was a big challenge for a city and a region that had growth goals, frankly. Over the last 20 years, I'm very pleased to report that we now retain over 50% of our college educated talent, folks who come to the region and choose to stay here. Over the last 20 years, that means a net of 181 plus thousand individuals who are between the ages of 25 and 34 who now call Greater Philadelphia home. This is one of the segments, that millennial segment that has grown in Greater Philadelphia over the last 20 years. You can go to the next slide, Bill. But we also know, and the folks in higher ed, we've been talking about this for so long, that growth is changing, it is shifting. Those students currently enrolled in college now, Generation Z, are fewer in numbers across the country than their millennial counterparts, where we experienced such growth over these last 20 years. You can see really on this chart here how those age bands change. The 15 to 24-year-old demographic right now, those are our Gen Zs. So much fewer in numbers than their millennial counterparts. We know that we are facing an enrollment cliff, and we're experiencing that across higher education at that point as we see enrollment numbers start to tick down ever so slightly. This trend will persist for the next 15 years, at least at this point in time. And we know that there's going to be a gap in our workforce. We need to be smart about how we ultimately fill that gap. We can go to the next slide, Bill. So a couple factoids here to keep in mind as we move forward and paint the picture here of international college educated talent in Greater Philadelphia. Employers absolutely cannot afford to overlook international talent. This is especially true here in Greater Philadelphia. At 15%, the city of Philadelphia has a larger share of foreign-born population compared to both Greater Philadelphia, which is at 10%, and the nation in total, which is at 14%. There are over 55,000 foreign-born students aged 16 plus in Greater Philadelphia, and that includes from multiple sources. We'll talk about that in just a moment. We also know that 32% of Philadelphia's foreign-born population aged 25 plus have at least a bachelor's degree, and that's compared to 34% of the total population. So they're tracking very closely in that space. 47% of the foreign-born population in Greater Philadelphia aged 25 or plus have at least a bachelor's degree. And so that's when we think about the region in total, and that's compared to 43% of the total population. All right, Bill, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Absolutely, yeah. So let's zoom out a little bit. We'll talk about a little bit of the methodology behind this study, because we're talking about, in the course of this presentation, we'll talk about a couple of different levels of zooming into the population. So the original goal here, when we set out with this project, was to determine the economic impact of former international students who had graduated from area institutions and entered the workforce. But in the course of our work with eConsult, it became clear that really based on the existing data sets, it wouldn't be feasible to track just that population of folks who graduated in F1 visa status and their economic impact, because there's no single survey that measures that. So it became clear that we needed to zoom out a little bit, and it actually gives us a good opportunity to contextualize international students and graduates of US institutions within a bit of a bigger picture of the international talent pool locally. So when we're thinking about the bigger picture here of the folks that we're talking about with our economic impact study, it includes international graduates who went to college in the US and later moved to the Philadelphia region to work, international graduates who went to college outside of the US and moved here for work, students who are enrolled at institutions in the Philadelphia region, and recent international grads, which comprises a non-citizen international workforce of about 68,000 people across the Greater Philadelphia region. So just to back up, the data provides an estimate for the size of the population that is A, in the region's workforce, B, is composed of non-US citizens, and C, has at least a bachelor's degree. Along the way, we did get some really neat insights into international student trends in our region. So I'll share those first, and we'll zoom in a bit on those. And then we'll zoom out a bit to talk about the bigger picture for what this means and what the economic impacts of these 68,000 folks in our region are. So looking at just international students to start off with, many of the international education folks in the room, or some of the nonprofit folks probably who do the retention work, will be familiar with the Open Doors report. It's a yearly census of international students across the USA conducted by IIE. The data has shown a consistent increase in international student enrollment basically since the 1950s, and quite an exponential curve over the last couple of decades with some blips. And you can see on this graph here that COVID-19 was a major blip. I think the helpful thing when you're looking at this is it provides some really useful context to frame the local data that we'll cover. So key things to know: the number of international students in the US has doubled in the past 2 decades, and is expected to continue growing. So IIE released a report last year called the Outlook 2030, which anticipates that the population of international students in the US has the capacity to double in the next 5 years by 2030. It's questionable whether we'll see increases to that extent given the new administration and geostrategic trends, but we expect to see, we have the capacity to enroll a large number of international students we have today, and we hope to see that keep climbing. Something else to note: today, international student enrollment accounts for approximately 6% of total post-secondary enrollment across the USA. So I want you to keep this number in mind as we look at the large share of international students in specific academic fields. So remember that 6% across the US is the sort of enrollment ratio. Something else to note when you're looking at this chart is that over 20% of people in the USA on an F1 student visa are actually working post-graduation on OPT, which is a work authorization that allows grads to work for up to 3 years on their visas. So it's a pretty large chunk of the overall population that is actually in the workforce across the US. So if we look on the local level now, across Greater Philadelphia, we've seen a sort of correlative increase in foreign-born student enrollment in the past decade, so an increase of 44% between 2011 and 2022. This is based on IPED's data, not Open Doors, so it's a broader set of students captured. It's students in F1 visa status, students in other dependent visa statuses, anyone who reports that they are not a citizen when they're reporting to their school. But the counts are actually fairly similar between Open Doors and IPED. So it hovers around 20 to 23,000 students in the region out of a total enrollment of domestic and international students of about 325,000. Something else to note is that 8% of all degrees earned in our region are earned by international students. And this is actually 2 percentage points higher than the national average of 6%. So we outdo most of the US in terms of the number of international grads we produce. You can also see that the share at the postgraduate level, so master's and PhD students, it's a greater share earned by international graduates than at the undergraduate level. And as we start to look at the academic fields, which we'll shift to next, I will note that according to IPEDS, international students earned fully 35% of STEM master's degrees and 41% of STEM PhDs in the US during the 2021 to 2022 academic year. So the undercurrent here is that really these graduates are so vital to our innovation economy. If you think about the impact of that number of students earning that share of our STEM degrees at the graduate level. So there's a few things to unpack on this slide. Basically, this is the share of degrees earned by international graduates out of the whole, as a portion of the whole. So something to note is that we produce as a region a vast number of graduates in business management and marketing and health professions and other related fields, which are quite large grab bags of industries, but still we really do a good job of creating students in those fields. And we generate a far smaller number of graduates in some of the other key STEM fields like math and statistics. But we see that there are a significantly large share of those degrees are earned by international graduates. So math and statistics, 24% of those degrees are earned by international students. Computer and information sciences, again, 24%. Engineering, 18% of those degrees are earned by international students. And physical sciences, 17%. So I'll remind you again that international students make up approximately only 6% of total enrollment nationally. So this is a really, really interesting picture of the sort of funnel of international students into those specific fields and what that means for our innovation economy and the work we do to attract the students as well. So looking at the trends for retention now, so we've gone from the degrees earned to then the pivot to the workforce and that transition into OPT. So a quick student visa work authorization 101 again. A student visa allows international graduates to work for up to 3 years post-graduation in a field related to their studies. The authorization is called OPT, or optional practical training. And for any employers in the room, it's super easy to hire graduates on OPT. They're basically indistinguishable from American workers when you're doing the hiring process. Other studies from IDP and QS and other, especially in the student attraction space, show us that a key incentive for prospective students around the world to choose the US as their study destination is the opportunity to get work experience on a student visa after they graduate. And this plays out. I mean, I think all of the international education folks in the room, whether you work in student attraction, student recruitment, or student support, this is always a question that comes up, is around, what are the opportunities for students when they graduate? So it's a core function of higher eds to fulfill when they're thinking about the, what are they doing to help students succeed? Thanks to a Freedom of Information request in the fall, ICE released a tranche of data that helps to show the extent to which we, as a kind of ecosystem, are retaining international talent in our region. And spoiler alert, we are not doing a great job of retaining international graduates from our higher education institutions. So unfortunately, as of 2023, over a quarter of international graduates who applied for optional practical training did not find any work at all. And of those that did, only around a third found jobs in our region. So the rest went to other parts of the US to work. Why is this significant? Why is this important to talk about? Well, every student that we retain in the workforce and in our local tax base contributes significantly to the local economy. So we'll shift now to looking at that big, we won't shift now to looking at the economic impacts, because Jen's going to take over and talk a bit about the OPT retention from a couple of different angles. So Jen, over to you.
Absolutely. So Bill, you sharing really that we have room to grow when we think about retaining international students here who choose to execute their OPT in the region, but we do have information on schools in this region and ultimately how many of their students over the last 20 years have gone out on OPT, and then ultimately how many have retained in the region. And it certainly does shine a spotlight on, we've posted the top 10 here. We have a list that's much longer than this in our back end of our research here, but just to show a few, Temple University, 2,600 plus students that have gone through the OPT process. 47% have retained in the region. That's huge. I mean, that's very much almost in line with how we're retaining domestic students in this region. So something to think about too. And when you think about those kinds of numbers, when you go down the list too, just to point out another, Westchester, smaller in numbers, a smaller scope of the international population there, but still retaining 51%. So huge contributions of these international students who are choosing to stay in this region. And we certainly do believe that this is an opportunity to grow our economy in this space by really making sure more of these international students execute their OPT in this region. But let's go to that next slide. Now, when we think about ultimately OPT participation retention for the top 20 fields of study in our greater Philadelphia region, this starts to give us some information that will be useful later on in the presentation. So we look at all of these different fields of study, from business management and marketing, engineering, computer information science, the list goes on. You can see ultimately how many students in this region went out on OPT and how many ultimately were retained in the region. So just by looking at this chart down the row here, in the business management marketing category, we're retaining about 41% of those graduates. But in other categories, that number fluctuates, and you can see as we go down the list. As we start to think about the matchups between the jobs that we have open in our economy and the degree holders that we're producing in this region, both domestic and international, this starts to paint a picture that there is incredible opportunity to encourage more international students to start their OPT here in Greater Philadelphia and to make sure that there are pathways for them to do so with employers in the region. Bill, you can go to the next slide.
Thanks, Jen. So this is kind of moving on to why all this is important, not just for higher eds and not just for enrollment, but also for the region as a whole. Because again, all of the 68,000 international workers who have at least a bachelor's degree in our region are contributing a lot to our regional economy. So when we take a look at the economic impact from the earnings of international graduates in our region, in the greater Philadelphia area, we're looking at economic output of about $5.7 billion every year, which supports 26,300 jobs. In the international education world, we often cite NAFSA's economic impact tool, which for Pennsylvania indicates that in the 2022 to 2023 academic year, about 50,000 international students were in the state and contributed about $2 billion to the state's coffers and supported 22,000 jobs. So if we tie this all into a big ball of the impact of both enrolled students and international graduates in the workforce, it is a significant boon to our region to attract, support, and retain these students effectively. And also, while it's noteworthy, it only tells a fraction of the story of the impact of this population when we take into account that a majority of master's and PhD grads stay in the US after graduation and contribute to the economy in a lot of intangible ways. So there's all of the impacts on innovation and entrepreneurship, and I'll touch on those a little bit later, but that's a indirect economic impacts that are harder to measure in some ways. If we look at tax revenues, here you see the contributions, which are basically an aggregate of wage, sales, and business taxes of this population. Again, those 68,000 folks who live in our region. I'll note that Philadelphia itself is a distinct tax entity from the rest of the Commonwealth. But if you add the city and the portion of the state together, about 3 times the annual earnings of the soda tax are brought in from international graduates every year. I think while it should be noted that immigrant residents educated at the bachelor's level or above are also beneficiaries of these tax dollars at work. And this is something I see, Tom Ginsberg's on the call. He referenced at an event we had in the fall about this. So folks, obviously, who are living and raising families in the region are also, consuming tax dollars. Due to their higher income bracket, international graduates tend to pay more into the system across the nation than they pull from it. So the bottom line here of all of this is that the work we do collectively to retain international graduates in our region's workforce has a great knock-on effect on our regional economy. And I'll hand over to Jen to talk a little bit about how this talent pool is meeting the needs of our core industries in Philadelphia.
Thanks, Bill. And before we advance to the next slide, just to paint the picture here a little bit more, we talked about the realities of enrollment challenges in higher education and how one solution is to think about increasing international enrollments. We know that that has a trickle effect into the economy and the workforce, and we know that there will be fewer workers in our region over the next 15 years, frankly, because Generation Z is a smaller cohort. Again, international workers are just one of a myriad of solutions that we need to explore to make sure that we remain competitive in Greater Philadelphia. So now I want to talk a little bit more about the matchups between the degrees earned by international students and the jobs that we know are prolific in our economy. So let's go to that next slide, Bill. And this is a lot of data. I had a few people in the chat ask if we'll be sharing these slides. The answer is a resounding yes. We'll send these out along with the recording. So if you'd like to listen along again, you can. But let me take you through these and also know that you'll have this to look at more in depth after the fact. So this slide talks about the average annual job postings requiring a bachelor's degree or higher in the Philadelphia MSA. And these are by industry type. So you can see really where some of these rankings fall. College and university is ranked number 1 with over 5,700 postings in a year. Computer systems design services is next, pharmaceutical and medicine manufacturing. You can see the number of employers all the way on the right-hand side too, to give you a sense ultimately of what the economy and the workforce looks like here in Greater Philadelphia and where the jobs are ultimately being posted. Let's go to the next slide. So this slide talks a little bit more about trends in growth around employment in key knowledge sectors in Greater Philadelphia. So let's break this down just a little bit. Sector, educational services. This location quotient ultimately paints the picture around whether nationally, how many more jobs do we have in this region compared to the broader nation. So when it comes to educational services, 1.82, we have a lot of these kinds of jobs in this region. In fact, right now, the total employment hovers at 179,000. Over the next 10 years, we anticipate an additional 20,000 jobs of growth in that space. That's 12% growth. The national average, we are really benchmarking at 13%. So this is an area that's going to continue to grow across the US. The same holds true for healthcare and social assistance. Again, we have a higher than average number of jobs in this sector here in Greater Philadelphia. There are upwards of nearly 600,000 people employed in this space. Over the next 10 years, we anticipate that 93,000 additional folks will be employed in this space. That's 18% growth, and that actually hovers just above what we anticipate the national average to be. You can see similar stats for the finance and insurance sector and the professional, scientific, and technical services sectors as well. Okay, Bill, we can go to that next slide. So now this slide looks at this issue from a different angle. This ultimately is talking about international graduates and their degree completions by major in the Philadelphia MSA versus national average. So we've talked a little bit about the industries that are growing in Greater Philadelphia. Let's talk about the students, the international students in particular, that we're producing here in Greater Philadelphia that are earning their degrees here. This runs down the list: business, management, marketing. That was on the former slide. We have over 1,100 graduates in this space. In Philadelphia, the MSA average is 23%. The national average is 15%. Net difference there of 6%. We've got a lot of graduates coming out in this space with this degree. In engineering, we had 610 in this space. You can go down the list here. Computer and information sciences, 829. Health professions, 299. These are areas that we ultimately know we will be growing in over the next 10 years in Greater Philadelphia. And they are areas where international students are choosing to earn their degrees here in Greater Philadelphia. All right, Bill, let's go to that next slide.
Oh, Jen, I might note, just I was
Yeah.
just thinking through. So we had a slide early which talked about the share of degrees earned by international students. So this is slightly different in that this is the percentage of the overall number of international graduates in each field, I think, right?
In each field, yeah.
Okay, perfect, thanks.
Yeah. And so, to go back really ultimately to what we've been framing out through this entire presentation, employers cannot afford to overlook international talent as you think to really really grow your workforce over the next decade. The international graduate population has the skills and credentials that align with our regional workforce demands across key sectors, and they include the life sciences, healthcare, professional services, computer and information sciences, engineering. We know that we're producing international graduates in this space, and we know that we have a need to hire in this space as well. There's incredible matchup and potential across these industry sectors for sure. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, so I think now we need to think about what this means for us and the task at hand for nonprofits, for higher eds, for the whole of our region to take this moment and take decisive action to retain better the international talent that we invest so much time and talent and treasure in training here. And there are opportunities, but there are also some challenges ahead. So we are in a good position as the US right now in a number of ways. We remain the world's most popular study destination. We are fortunate in some ways that our competitor countries are struggling a bit, to be honest. Like the competitors in the Anglophone world, so Canada, the UK, Australia, have essentially exceeded their capacity to host international students. Each of those countries is at between 20 to 30% of their overall enrollment being international. And Canada and Australia have brought into place caps in overall international student numbers. The UK has barred dependents from joining the student studying in the UK, so numbers in those countries are limited. And again, in the US, we have excess capacity, and colleges are desperate for more students. We hear Jen open with the enrollment cliff, and she'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But we are only at 6% international enrollment now, and our schools could certainly make space for more, or have space for more international students. International talent is vital for innovation. So we've talked a little bit about the ways that these grads meet the needs of our workforce, but there's a lot of data to suggest that they also perform an outsized role in driving innovation in the workforce. So around 15% of the US population is foreign-born, and thanks to Tom Ginsberg and Pew for their groundbreaking research on that. And the vast majority, around 77% of the immigrants in the US are here legally in permanent resident or temporary visa status. No matter what the kind of received wisdom might be from everything you hear in the press or social media about immigration, the vast majority of immigrants in this country are here legally. Immigrants and non-immigrants have an outsized impact on the innovation economy, including the fact that one in four, I go blue in the face saying this, so if you've heard me say this before, I apologize, but $1 in $4 billion startups in the US has a founder or co-founder who came here as an international student. Almost half of companies in the Fortune 500 were founded by immigrants or children of immigrants. And over a third of Nobel Prize winners in the US have been immigrants or former international students and scholars. And it really should be emphasized too, because I think a lot of the concern, and this has been reflected in national surveys too, that folks are worried that that immigrants and international students are taking opportunities away from Americans. But it should be really emphasized that it's not a zero-sum game. It's a lump of labor fallacy that's at work in a lot of mindsets around this. But the decks are quite often stacked against immigrants and international students when it comes to these very points of innovation and entrepreneurship, because the US, for example, is I think the only OECD country that does not have a startup visa, and yet so many international students find a route to make that happen. Immigrants have been shown to expand labor supply and create more jobs than they take. So it's really we need to have a bit of a paradigm shift and flip the script on the conversation. I think that's a very Philly thing to do, right? Flip the script on the conversation about this.
I like
that. And obviously, Jen opened by talking about the difficulty of the current administration. So here I've noted the Trump administration is sending mixed signals. It's sending very clear signals when it comes to undocumented students. And let's just set that aside for the moment, because this conversation is a little bit more about students in legal visa status. But obviously, that's a hugely traumatic development going on in the US right now. But on the other hand, he talked about stapling green cards to the diplomas of international students, which is becoming a bit of an old adage at this stage, because I think numerous presidents in a row have said that's so important. And it goes to show that how interested industry is in retaining this talent, because we really need international graduates to fill roles in the economy. I think it's helpful to look back at Trump's first term to think about how his administration positioned itself towards international education, and to some extent, they were fairly adversarial towards, especially the work authorizations. So Stephen Miller was very interested in seeing how they could curtail OPT, but industry pushback meant that OPT was not in the end curtailed or impacted. Neither was CPT, which is kind of the internship authorization that students use. I think there was data to suggest that if the OPT program was scrapped entirely, the workforce across the US would shrink by 0.15%. So it goes to show that folks, even that proportion, that 200,000+ students on OPT are having this accelerating effect on the workforce. So there's a lot yet to be seen. There's some really good resources actually from the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration that talk about both the retrospective, what we experienced last time in terms of the administration's positioning towards international students, and what, based on the signals out there, based on Project 2025, we can expect to hear in the next few years.
So, Bill, when we think about our population is shrinking, I'm just going to expand on that a little bit. It is shifting. We know that Generation Z, those students that are currently enrolled in college, it's a smaller cohort than the millennial cohort that came before them, and certainly the baby boomer cohort that's exiting the workforce and what's being really called a silver tsunami. So we have less workers entering the workforce just by nature of that population shift. We've seen this across higher ed enrollments, and we've certainly been talking about this for the last 15 years around the enrollment cliff, and that it's coming in 2026. In so many ways, COVID really has sped that up. It is upon us now for sure. COVID, and I would say the changing, really thought process around the importance of higher education and some of the shifting narrative in the U.S. around that. But here in Greater Philadelphia, let's make those numbers a little bit more concrete. I was just looking at this morning. In 2013, so 20 years ago at this point in time, a little over 20 years ago, we had 348,000 college students in the Philadelphia MSA. Today, well, the data that I have access to is from 2022. We have 314,000. That's a difference of over 33,000, a decrease. When we look even broader, when we look 50 miles out from Philadelphia city center, and we think about all of the institutions in that region, there nearly in 2013 were 600,000 students enrolled in all of those schools, and that is down by over 57,000 in the last 10 plus years at this point in time. So we know that this change has happened. Some of that is because we've seen institutions close, but those of us who have worked in higher ed for a long time have certainly seen enrollment change. So when we think about the international cohort as a population that has real potential to grow in the U.S., Bill, you've talked to me quite a bit about projections around growth of international students here in the country, but certainly also in Greater Philadelphia. And we see this as one opportunity to both increase enrollments in higher education, but also as those students choose to use their OPT, staying local could make a real difference in our workforce economy here in Greater Philadelphia. Now, make no mistake, this is only one solution in a workforce really spectrum that we need to think about in Greater Philadelphia. We, of course, need to be thinking about opportunities for local youth and local residents to move into workforce in different and expanded capacities. But this is also another lever we have to pull, and one that's very much actionable. I also want to point out that retaining international talent is a full ecosystem effort. We can do everything in our power to really mark Philadelphia as America's college town, as the place for international talent to come when they think about studying in the United States. And that's great if they choose to come here to Greater Philadelphia. But if they don't have access to employers who are willing to hire them, they're not going to stay in this region for their OPT or any future visa authorization as well. And so we certainly need all players, whether that's our higher ed partners, our government partners, our nonprofit partners, all of our employers who are really considering hiring this talent, to make sure that it is a full pipeline effort. We'll talk about in a little while. An accompanying piece that we have along this research is an employer guide. It's designed to demystify the process for employers who are thinking about hiring their first student that's on OPT, their first international graduate that's on OPT. And we'll be talking more about that resource. It's available now for use, and we'll be putting some programming in place around that as well. Bill, would you add anything else to any of these?
I think I would just say that, to your point about this being a part of a broader recipe, a broader mix that we need, is a yes and approach. I like to think of this international students not as a panacea, but kind of a lifeline for higher eds, and in some industry sectors, an important source of talent that employers might not be able to find just from domestic supply. So it's not an insignificant number of folks in this pipeline who we can, going back to the OPT figures, we have almost 2,000 folks every year going on to OPT or on OPT in our region, and that's a significant chunk of skilled workers when we think about the balance of master's degree versus bachelor's, because I think we're probably at a phase to look back at the degree attainment breakdown. A significant chunk of degrees earned by international students in this region are at the graduate level. So obviously they're going into higher skilled jobs, higher paid jobs, and then driving that economic output in a greater way.
Thanks, Bill. So I think at this point we'd like to transition to Q&A for a bit. And Bill, if you want, you can take the slides down so we can see everybody's faces. We ultimately would welcome you to enter your question in the chat, or you can unmute and ask live if you'd like. We're getting a few questions around whether these slides will be available. Yes, we will make the slides available. We'll also make the recording available. So we'll make sure this full group gets that, and we'll post it on our respective websites as well. So with that, please go ask away.
You'd also welcome comments if any folks in the room. I know we have some expert voices in the room on various aspects of this topic, or who intersect with this topic in various ways. So, for example, if you're in the career services space, what are your perspectives? What are you hearing from students? Tom Ginsberg, I know you're in the room. If you have any thoughts or ways to round this out, please feel free to share perspectives.
We'll let the questions percolate. Please feel free to put them in the chat. We do have just one additional resource slide, which we can jump to. Just checking to see if we've got anybody who has questions. Let's go to that last slide. We'll chat through this last slide while you think about whether or not you have any questions. Actually, here, we've got some questions coming in, Bill, so why don't we take them?
Sure.
Yeah, Tom Ginsberg asked, curious about OPT. What do you know about its status in the new administration?
So the administration has made no specific noises, as far as I know, about the OPT program. I think, again, we have to look back to the previous administration's positioning on OPT and think, what is the likelihood that that will be renewed under this administration, knowing that Stephen Miller specifically was not a fan of the OPT work authorization or CPT work authorization. The previous administration launched what they called optional optical illusion, which was a kind of an operation that tried to sniff out any criminal enterprise among OPT students. I think across the nation, they found maybe 15 students who were abusing OPT and arrested them, which is a tiny splash in the bucket. So I'd be surprised. I'm hoping that we won't see any major moves against OPT, not least because there was a lawsuit that made it up to the Supreme Court, I think towards the end of the last administration, brought by some tech workers against the OPT program, claiming that it took jobs away from Americans. That was ultimately just determined not to have standing. So there's my hope. We will stay tuned. Obviously, the news is moving very fast, especially when it comes to immigration. So yeah, we will digest and respond as things change. But my hope is that we will not see any curtailing to OPT, especially because of that industry pushback. Like, there's so many businesses that rely on this workforce.
Yeah, for sure. We've got a couple more questions coming in the chat. Is there anything you wish more hiring companies knew, or that recruitment and talent acquisition start doing differently? Oh, yes, we have a list of things, right, Phil? I mean, I think
check out the toolkit. Let me put it in the chat. But yes, absolutely.
Check out the toolkit for sure. I think, one big myth is that it is so hard and expensive to hire international talent. And frankly, when you're thinking about the OPT process, that's just not true. Bill, do you want to talk a little bit more about this? This is really your area of expertise.
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, I think I noted this as we went through, but for companies that have never really hired international graduates before, I think there's this hesitation and the sort of visa anxiety that there must be some kind of sponsorship relationship with this graduate. But no, realistically, the visa status stays, as you will know, Chelsea, if you're at is it Drexel you're with? Yeah, the visa status stays with the school for the length of the time the student is on OPT. So for an employer, really, the only difference between an international candidate and a domestic candidate right out of graduation is they show a different document at the I-9 process. I think to your question about things we wish companies knew or recruiters, talent acquisition started doing differently, there are legion comments we've had as we put together these resources across the last couple of years. One of the most significant ones is we wish that companies would get rid of that checkbox on their applications that says, do you now or will you ever require work authorization or sponsorship from the company, because it's a significant source of trauma for students who are submitting applications left, right, and center. Hundreds of applications to jobs that they feel are just being denied because of that little checkbox, which filters them out as international candidates who companies are worried they won't retain. But also in the course of this research, we found out, what was it, Jen, that is it over 50% of recent graduates leave their first job within a year? So
Yes, yes. And just to expand on that, Gen Z is very specific about the kinds of work that they want to do. We're seeing this. These are all trends in this space. And we've noticed, and this has been published, I think it was by NACE more recently, that 50% of first-time hires into the workforce, so that it's that Gen Z cohort getting their first job, retain at their employer for more than 1 year in their first job. So when you start to think about the argument saying, well, international students, if they're on OPT, we're only going to be able to retain them for 1 to 3 years based on their, on ultimately what their degree type was in. That argument's a little counterproductive when you think that Gen Z already is entering their first job and exiting their first job in high numbers in the first year as it goes. So that's a bit of it's part of a bigger issue, I think, too, around employer retention. But it does start to really crack away at that argument for sure. So we've got a couple more questions in the chat too that are coming in regarding OPT students. Is the lottery process the only pathway for residency?
No. So there are other options. One of them that is increasingly popular is what's called the O1 visa. It's a high-skilled visa category, which probably is. I mean, I don't want to. I'm not an immigration attorney, so I don't really talk through the eligibility. Most folks use the H-1B pathway for a reason, which is that it's available to graduates with just the minimum is a bachelor's degree, completed a bachelor's degree from an accredited university somewhere around the world. So there are other pathways. You can be sponsored by an employer for a green card out of like in your post-college years, but it's very unusual unless you have really sort of an elite level of knowledge in what you're doing. So I've known international graduates who were on OPT sponsor themselves for what's called a national interest waiver green card, which basically means that you are you're within sort of like the 0.01% worldwide of what you do, and the US economy and research ecosystem needs your expertise to such an extent that you can do that. But realistically, yeah, H-1B is the most common pathway. So, and a lot of students, they'll work for their 3 years of OPT, and maybe they won't be interested, or they won't go into H-1B. They'll get another degree after that, and then they can do OPT again. But yeah, I mean, I know I saw. Let's see who was on this call. I saw Imran was on the call earlier. Imran, I don't know, not to put you in the spotlight, but I know you have some interesting perspectives on O1 stuff.
I
Maybe
think
other
Chris
pathways that I haven't touched on.
Hi everyone. Hi, Bill and Jen. Sure. I mean, the two things I'd say to that. One on the O1A is something that will be released into the Greater Philadelphia market probably in the next month or two, and you can get a preview on it. Is an O1A tracker that allows candidates themselves to be able to go through a kind of an AI generated kind of checklist process to figure out how to qualify. I think there's so many missing perceptions around what it takes to qualify for the O1A. And in practice, you really only have to hit 3 of the 8 areas of qualification, and a lot of advanced STEM graduates would meet them if they knew exactly what they were and how to kind of navigate the process. And so this toolkit is coming out in the next couple of months and will be kind of shared broadly. And we'll be launching first in the Greater Philadelphia market, which is very exciting. So there's a group called Path Immigration that's been kind of developing this over some time, and I'm looking to pilot in Greater Philadelphia and get more data from candidates. But the O1A is certainly one of the most under-leveraged tools. It's uncapped, and a small minority of STEM graduates today are even applying for it. The other one that Bill, you and I have spent some time on is the H-1B uncapped, which avoids the stress and the limitations of the lottery. So if candidates are looking to work at a nonprofit organizations that could include hospital systems, which are oftentimes education systems, and hospital systems are the largest nonprofit employers. And so either on the technical side, on the clinical side, anything that kind of touches a nonprofit employer for a skilled role that requires a bachelor's degree or higher can typically qualify for H-1B uncapped. There's obviously a lot of complexity when you kind of get down to what qualifies and what doesn't, but as a category, the H-1B uncapped is another one that is largely under leveraged and creates a lot of opportunity for skilled international student graduates who are looking to stay and retain the workforce.
Imran, thank you for that. Thanks for that insight. Thanks for jumping on with us. Imran is
Of course, good to see you, Jen.
Yeah, you too. You too. We have just a couple minutes left, so we are going to just Bill, why don't we share that last slide, because we have one question that I didn't hit on in the chat, but it actually ties right into these resources. So great. So Gabriella asked, did you say you'd be putting on more programs to assist employers with hiring international students? And yes, the answer is a resounding yes. We mentioned that we produced this this research alongside an employer guide that really is designed to walk employers through the process of hiring international students. And we have an employer event scheduled in partnership with the Chamber of Commerce, hiring international student talent. It's specifically for employers who want to learn more, who are ready to do the work and understand the complexities, and frankly, demystify those complexities a bit. And that's scheduled for March 28th. So we'll be sharing more information out about that. It'll be hosted at the Chamber of Commerce here in Philadelphia, for Greater Philadelphia. And we're really looking forward to that. But a few other resources that we would like you to be aware of, and Bill, feel free to chime in on any of these. But we've talked about the research report and the employer toolkit. We also want to give a shout out to our friends at the Philadelphia Global Education Hub. You know, this group, which we are part of, really was started by Temple and Drexel, and there are so many other institutions that are part of this now. But it's all about making sure that we really amplify Greater Philadelphia as an incredible hub for international students to come and study. I like to throw out there that Philadelphia is America's college town, and we certainly want to make sure that continues, that people know to choose Philadelphia when they come here to the U.S. to study. And we'll be releasing more information through that Philadelphia Global Ed Hub. But for those of you who have joined us for those meetings in the past, we don't have one scheduled quite yet, but I know we will in the coming months. Join that group, because we really are working together to amplify Greater Philadelphia as a great place to be an international student. And then I'll just make a plug too for the NACE annual conference, which is happening here in Philadelphia in June. NACE is the National Association of Colleges and Employers. Bill and I will both be there presenting not so much the research, much more so the employer toolkit, and sharing that resource, because it is, at this point in time, it's applicable to wherever you are in the country. It really does demystify the process. It's not specific to Greater Philly at all. So we hope we can share that resource nationally. For sure. Bill, anything else you'd add here?
I think just to sum it up, really, and to your point about the Global Ed Hub, you know, the retention is such a large part of international student recruitment now, because again, the messaging, the questions that students are increasingly focused on, especially when they're thinking about the ROI of the potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars that they are spending on a US education, or their parents are spending, or their parents are mortgaging their houses to spend on their kids' higher education in the US. The reason they're interested in that is largely for the economic opportunity that exists in concert with the international student, the F1 visa. So, you know, while yes, we have amazing educational assets in Greater Philadelphia and across the US, you know, a lot of countries do too, but we have this special source of also having this pathway, this opportunity for international graduates to work. We just really need to come together as, and Jen mentioned this, as an ecosystem to foster that connection and help build this secure this pipeline for international graduates into the workforce, because it feeds into the recruitment and attraction too. If we can say we have these amazing outcomes, look, we can count the number of international students in our region that we created opportunities for. Yeah, we can turn that into a wonderful sales pitch for why students should come to our institutions, and again, be a lifeline for those institutions as we counter the enrollment challenges of the next decade or so. But stay tuned, because we'll be messaging more around this space Campus Philly and International House Philadelphia are continuing to explore ways to get this out in the world and move the needle on not just the advocacy piece and the conversation, but how we can tangibly make a difference in this space. So yeah,
All right,
thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, Bill. Thank you to everyone who was in the audience today. We will absolutely share these resources out just later today, likely when we get it all uploaded. Thanks. If you have any additional questions, feel free to send them to Bill and I. You can find us, both at our respective organizations. We're here, and we really appreciate you being with us today. Thank you.